No, you're brave, Chad.
Yeah, I know. So that this is supposed to be interactive. Just make sure I'm on here. Oh, that's terrible. I'm ready. Sign me up, coach. How about this? Maybe this just won't work. I walk around too much.
What if we have a dictionary tag?
Calm down, native.
Probably a good idea. I don't know whose it is. So I'm going to bookend this with prayer because I think that's a proper thing to do. Does that sound good? Okay. So I'm going to pray for us and then get started. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us together again today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share what I have learned. I pray this will be a good interactive experience and that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart will be acceptable to you. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. Sorry I put your book down there. So I originally, what I said over there is I've heard 50% of college students will lose their faith. Wicca is the fastest growing religion in America. And one of the passions that's always been for me has been story, the concept of story. C.S. Lewis got very passionate about the concept of myth right before he became converted. That gives me hope for people like Jordan Peterson. But another person in that realm is a guy named Joseph Campbell, who wrote constantly about myth, but he always put them on the same plane and never really committed to one. Carl Jung's another person like that too. So we describe everything in stories, even objects like this. Whoever's this is.
Brian, be careful.
This is, oh geez, okay. What is this? This is pretty easy. It's a cup, but it's not a cup. We don't think of it like a cup. We think of it as something that holds liquid, right? That's you say cup, what does that really mean? It means something else. It points to something outside of itself. I think that's why Jackie Chan was really kind of cool, because when you saw a ladder, he didn't see something you climb, he saw something you hit people with. So that was kind of neat. When my daughter was 6 going on 7 months old, my youngest one, we walked into the kitchen and we saw her walking around on the kitchen table like this. Like, she couldn't walk, but she was trying on the kitchen table, 6 months. So it's like this. It's like a little alien on its feet or something. So what she did was she climbed on the chair, climbed on the table, and then decided to walk around. So to her, table didn't mean anything. It just happens to be something taller you stand on. So for the next about 1.5 to 2 years, we stacked all the chairs up in the corner just so she wouldn't, violate the nature of that word. And so when we go through life, we are constantly telling ourselves a story. It answers the 4 essential questions. Where do I come from? Why am I here? How do I act? Where am I going? Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. So we have to answer those questions. If you don't have an answer for them, that's a vacuum, and something else will fill that unless you're intentional on it. So the other thing that happened is I had Hindis come into my life, which was kind of neat. I've never exercised Eastern thought per se. I've had a lot of experience with Muslims. So I read the Quran multiple times, read one version of the Hadith. I got to read a couple more. So I've had a lot of conversational experience with them, but never with the Hindis. And so I'm like, well, this is a good time to maybe explore some Hindi thought. I read Gandhi's autobiography, which was very interesting. Has anybody not heard that name before? Gandhi? Okay, good. So we're all sort of familiar with him. Very involved, very passionate about his country, very involved in politics. And believe it or not, when he started examining faith, his first challenge was from the Christian perspective. He didn't take his faith seriously until he was challenged by Christians upon what he believed. And his first response was like, I'm going to examine my own first and go from there. And because he was very honorable to his country. The whole Wiccan push comes, I think, through like multiple facets, one of which is this concept of planet worship. We need to take care of the planet, right? We tell ourselves stories like this. Fern Gully, has anybody ever seen Fern Gully before, the cartoon? How about Avatar? So I watched Avatar 2. I sort of liked it, not really. I liked the movie when I was watching it. When I started thinking about it, I didn't. It's the whole concept that they live in a utopia, that they're in parallel with the Earth, and there's no war whatsoever. It's only when the humans come in that's when war and stuff starts happening, because only the humans want greedy things. But there's like interpersonal jousting with the suns who literally leave each other to die. And like, you're telling me that's harmony with nature. But no, that breeds war later on. So it was a giant conflicting thing. We tell ourselves these stories all the time. In the Wiccan philosophy, I actually read one book on this topic, and that was recommended to me by a pagan who was a member of the Harrisburg biker gang called the Pagans, which is really kind of neat. And he said he recommended me this book called The Witch's 10 Commandments, and there's a philosophy in there that's and it was started by a guy named Gerald Gardner in 1950. And before that, he says he was like entered into the coven at like 1939 in Europe somewhere. So that's where this kind of originated from. And the saying he has in there, that saying that permeates like all of Wiccan thought, is do no harm and live your life. And that's the philosophy behind it. I'm not going to get too into the magic stuff because I don't think that's really relevant. Carl Jung, I think, has a great explanation when it comes to magic. Magic is dark because you can't see it. And I think that's a good way of describing magic. If a sleight of hand trick, right? It looks amazing. Until you know what he's doing, then it's like, all right, well, it lost its luster. It's not magic anymore. It's something else. I think there is also something to do with there might be some truth with the horoscopes and stuff like that. We have to remind ourselves, well, maybe not, but it is still there. The Canaanites used the stars to find Christ. But Christ was the destination. So we have to be careful we don't hold on to that as being something that, that's the be-all, end-all. So I think the do no harm and live as you may is probably one of the most devastating philosophies you can live by. It's I can't think of anything more harmful. So from Wiccan, that comes from pagan belief, and pagan belief is all over the place. So it'll be very tough for me to like map all that out in the time that we have here, unless you want to be here for a couple of hours. I prefer not. My voice only lasts so long. But in the pagan philosophy, usually the case is you have a hierarchy, you have a bunch of gods, you get to choose what your hierarchy is. You choose your main god and you go that direction. And however that looks, however you worship, well, that's just how it is. And there's many factions for that. Just like Wicca. Wicca started with some sort of centralization from Gerald Gardner, but now, because it's like 2 generations from that, roughly speaking, you can ask a Wiccan what they do and get a different response every time. The rituals are different based on what you want to do. The thing that permeates all of these, not permeates, but the commonality between all these is they have karma, which goes back to the East. The idea that whatever you do, it's called a threefold return. Whatever you do, it'll come back to you 3 times. You can make a case for heaven, but you don't have to. There is a concept of reincarnation. You're going to come back as something, but that could be on the planet, that could be in heaven, whatever that looks like, and it depends which Wiccan you ask. So the pagan, the guy that he was really engaging. He actually grew up. We were talking about fundamentalism in the Inklings. He's one of the people that said, I had all these questions, no one ever answered them. And I'm like, that's a shame, man. What questions do you have? And I think he was in his maybe mid-late 50s. He didn't feel like asking the questions, but I followed him anyway. We had a great conversation for it was about 2 hours at work, which was pretty amazing. And he described God and the reality thereof 2 ways. He said, it's like a bunch of blind men in a pit with an elephant. One thinks it's a snake because he got the tail. One thinks it's, God's a horn because he has, hold of the tusks. One thing it's just like a giant piece of leather because he's touching the side. I'm like, well, all right. Who says it's an elephant though? Like you're assuming a higher perspective. Like you already know what it is. And you're saying people live down here. And the other way he described it was like there's a light and everyone's looking at it from the different angles. Now he couldn't live this out. And it's kind of a shame because he had a very high work ethic. He got into trouble because he got in a fight with another forklift driver who fell asleep on his forklift, because you could go hide in the back and fall asleep on your forklift and get paid for it. And so he did, and this guy had a problem with that, got in a fight with him. Why couldn't he understand his other friend's perspective? Maybe he worships God by sleeping. Well, I don't know. So I could never talk to him again. It's very frustrating. I wanted to actually ask him that question. Like, where do you go with this? If God's all perspective and he's honoring his perspective, how do you rectify that? So that's kind of like the paganistic mindset. Like you worship the way you worship. And then that pulls from further Eastern culture, which is in the Hindi area. Now, the Hindis, and this is a very broad history, The Hindus only ever had like 2 or 3 core beliefs, core religions. They believe that the world was created through the navel of Vishnu. You have Ganesh, which is that elephant god. There's also one. Some of these escape. There's a lot of them. Their names are just something I can read, and I don't think I can say. I'm sure someone could correct me on that. And I'm looking forward to the conversations I have with other Hindus. There's one that controls the world from beneath, but there's also Krishna. Now, Krishna would be like the Christ character. And I read the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, and I read some commentary on it too, because I wanted to understand what I'm reading. And you have to do this a lot when it comes to, well, the Quran, for instance. It's good to read commentary on the Quran because it's not in sequential order. It's in order of length. So if you read it start to finish, you'd be like, I have no idea what I read. You need to read like supplementary teachings to figure out what exactly is going on in the Quran. So in the Gita, has anybody read the Gita before? Okay, cool, 2 of you. That's something. In the Gita, there's a bunch of layers to it. The one is, okay, you have Arjuna talking with Krishna. That's the whole thing. This whole thing is being told to the blind uncle of Arjuna. Arjuna is a prince. He has the right to rule the country. But he was young when he got into his kinghood, so his blind uncle took over for him. And as I got older, blind uncle wanted his son to rule instead. So his son and Arjuna are about to fight in a big war. And this whole conversation is supposed to be dictated to, it's like the rumor or something like that, by another person, like a seer. He saw this conversation happen. So there's like multiple layers to that. And in there, Krishna puts out a lot of the core beliefs that are in Hindi thought, that are in Eastern thought. The concept of reincarnation, the concept of the caste system. If I'm remembering right, it's like you have the warrior class, the priest class, the untouchable class, then you have the non-class. The non-class is like the one that's, they're your spiritual advisors, but they beg for food. Like they're not allowed to work. That's just kind of their life. That's what they do. So he makes that case for all of that. And he says a couple things in there that really, I can't wrap my head around, but maybe I'm pretty sure that the Hindus won't be able to either, because in the East, you live with this thing called the both and logic. You hold everything together even though it doesn't make sense. And so he doesn't want to fight this fight. Arjuna doesn't want to fight this fight. Krishna is his charioteer. Krishna is supposed to be the one man, the only person. He is you, he is me, he's everyone that ever existed. That's Krishna. And he emerges whenever he feels like emerging. He's like the ultimate person you're supposed to be. He's the conscious and the unconscious. So Arjuna doesn't want to fight this fight. So Krishna says quite a few things, but he says 2 things specifically. One is, it doesn't matter anyway. Everything is all one again at the end. And he says, you should do what your caste is supposed to do, which is fight, because it's more real than not doing it. And so, I mean, you're all thinkers in here. It takes you 2 seconds to figure out, okay, well, it doesn't matter anyway. Why do things this particular way? So I'm going to leave that one as wrestling with, because as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't make sense. He also says something about the concept of hell, and especially when he gets to like Jainism. He doesn't get into Jainism specifically, but whenever you see visions of hell in Eastern thought, when you see people, you see people. You don't see people with names attached. It's just a person. Because when you die and come back, you're not you anymore, and you forget everything you ever did. And Krishna says something like, the people have done evil. I keep giving them worse and worse lives, and they still don't learn. And I'm like, all right, that's like, the beatings will continue until morality improves, like that kind of thing. Like, how are you supposed to learn from that? That's very weird. So that's kind of what I got from the Gita. Like, you should do what's good, but it doesn't matter anyway. So how do you get your individuality? Well, your dignity goes away. The guy who was given the commentary in the book, he said that it makes a mild case for the caste system, but it's not there. There is definitely a caste system in India right now. What's that? And oh, sure. But it's definitely more prevalent there. Like the untouchable class, they're literally like never. They'll never go out there. No, that's good. That's a good point. They would not get over here. So that's going all the way to the Hindi class, and from there, so I'm going over all these stories because these are the things that moderate their lives. From there, you have the Buddha, Gautama Buddha. And Buddha took a look at the karmic cycle, and this makes sense. And I think it makes sense once you especially go east of Eden, because that's the direction that Adam and Eve went. Once you stop looking up or to transcendent things, because you're separated from God, you start to look down. So what do we see? You die, you go into the ground, animals eat something in the ground, something comes out of the animal, that's you. That's the Atman. It's you cut a seed in half, and there you are. Like that's where you come from. So that's what you see. You see the reincarnation cycle based on what you see. So I can see how man can just ignore the transcendent and just that's what he sees and that's what he goes by. One thing I do like about the Hindi culture that I think we lose here in America, because they're all, who was it saying to me that all religions have some good things in them, but they're demonic at the same time? I forget who was talking to me. It might have been Bruce. So it's good to honor your father and mother. That's a good thing. They do that constantly. Family is where you get everything. In their culture, if someone were to introduce me up here, they would list a whole bunch of things and then say, and here's his son. Because my family dictates who I am. Honor and family, that kind of thing, they go hand in hand. Instead of being, naming my credentials and then presenting me, which doesn't, I don't think that makes sense when it comes to the reincarnation process. Like, how on earth did those correlate? The other thing they have over there is duty. What is your duty to life? And that's a good thing also. That has you pick up some of the responsibility on the planet and maybe make it a little better. They're a little perverted, but that is the way that they're taught over there, which I think is kind of neat. So for Gautama Buddha, he took a look at that reincarnation cycle, and you guys ever see the movie Sleeping Beauty for Disney? Okay, so so what happens? They don't invite the evil fairy Maleficent. It's an old couple. They have one child, a daughter. They don't invite the evil fairy. She shows up. They say, we forgot to invite you. And she's like, okay, yeah, whatever. And so she curses her. She says, on your 16th birthday, you'll die. All these fairies gave her these blessings, but when she turns 16, she's out of there. One fairy left gives her another boon that says, you won't die, you'll just sleep. And so later on, you see her when she's older, and she's in a forest, and the animals are literally singing to her because it's paradise. There's no evil there, nothing that will harm her. She meets the first guy she's ever seen in her life. He has to leave. She immediately has like PTSD because he left, and willfully, magically finds the only spindle in existence and thrusts her finger on it because she just can't take it. But that's one way of looking at it. So in Buddha, he is a prince. He's given no exposure to evil or death whatsoever. And finally, when he's old, he's almost 18, I think, somewhere around there, he's given 3 chariot rides. The first one, he sees somebody old. He's never seen anybody old. He's been surrounded by wealth and riches and women and all this stuff because his father wanted to spare him from that stuff. And he asks his charioteer about it, and he's like, that's the way of all men. And then he sees somebody who's sick. He's never seen anybody sick before. And the charioteer's like, that's just what happens. Then he sees somebody who's dead, like a funeral procession. And the charioteer's like, yeah. And so after he saw the third one, he was so shell-shocked. He's like, I want out. I'm going to seek nirvana. You guys know what nirvana means? Anybody?
Nothingness.
Nothingness? Mindless state. It actually means to extinguish. So you're right. It's detachment of desire. So one of the things that, if you go back to the Hindi scriptures, they teach 2 things. They say, all these laws we have are built on the laws of love. So depends on your definition of love, right? But whatever your definition of love is, there's a relationship. There has to be with love, one way or another. But they also preach detachment. You must separate yourself from the things of this world because all is maya. Everything's illusion. It's not real. So it is. Does anybody not know who Nietzsche is? Probably heard of him once in a while. In this group, you probably have. So I really like Nietzsche. I'm fond of him, rather. Sorry, liking is a bad word. I'm fond of the way he thinks because he would philosophize with a hammer. And those of you who have done science can understand this. So when you have a hypothesis, what do you try to do? Do you try to prove it? No, you try to disprove it as hard as possible. and you see what's left. And that's what you have. Even if it's nothing. Okay, bad hypothesis. Move on to the next one. And so that's what Nietzsche did. He hammered out everything. And Nietzsche and Gandhi actually had the same response when it came to Christianity. Gandhi said, I like your Christ, I don't like your Christians. And Nietzsche said, you're saved, have to look more saved for me to buy into their savior. And that's fair, man. All the railings against Christianity are usually toward the church and mass per se, and to the individuals that wear his cloak, but don't do him justice. That kind of thing. So that's Nietzsche. And he didn't like the Enlightenment too much. He didn't spend too much time on it. He wrote a lot about Christianity. He even wrote a lot about the concept of atheism, but having no story whatsoever. And about the Hindi thought of illusion, Maya. He said, to assume illusion is to assume you can never get to truth. And for a guy like that, Nietzsche was like lecturing at 22. I think his IQ was over 200. Just like when I read this book, The Zarathustra, and I was blown away. Just when you think you know what he's talking about, there's like another layer you can uncover through the various chapters. It's really kind of cool. And for enlightenment, he said, enlightenment is an excuse for inaction. And I thought that was pretty clear. Alexander the Great actually went over to India and met some of those philosophers. Like, I had no idea. This stuff in history just fascinates me. And he goes over to India, and he goes to a city, and he's like, him and Socrates are there. And Socrates is described as an incessant chatterbox. And it gives me hope for myself, because I tend to not stop talking. But that's okay. I have to will myself to listen to the other people. I'm ready. Let's go. So he went over there, and he's like, we want to talk to your philosophers and see what they think. Because the Hindi culture is not historically sound as far as the military strength. The Muslims basically ran roughshod over them. That's how they got a lot of their wealth. They couldn't stand the Muslim force. So Alexander the Great went over there, and he's like, I want to talk to your philosophers. And they're over there on a rock. And he went over there. There's like 3 guys on a rock just burning themselves in the sun with their disciples standing with a stick next to them. They've done this for like 2 days straight, something like that. And through an interpreter, they're like, we want to talk to you about philosophy and thinking. And they look at him, they're like, how can we talk to you about philosophy? You have all of your clothes on. Because they're so detached, that's their whole life, is just to have detachment. But it's a giant contradiction when you try to have love, relationship, and detachment at the same time. Something gives. There's some incoherence there. So if you're having if the story you're telling yourself is, do no harm and live as you may, Jainism buys into this. Like, those guys will wear masks. They're afraid the germs of their mouth might get into you. So they'll go to the nth degree, make sure they don't interact with you. Now I think, and maybe you guys can help me out with this. Do no harm and live as you may. Why is that? Is that a bad thing? Is it? I'll give you another one that counters that. It's Augustine. Augustine said, love God and live your life. So what's the difference between the two? Love God and live your life. Or do as you will. Love God and do as you will. That's Augustine. Do no harm and do as you will. That's the Wiccan philosophy. So what's the difference there? Yeah. You're focusing on yourself. That's part of it. Which direction are they going? Okay. Yeah. Who can know it? Who can know? That's it. It's pretty simple. Jeremiah's right there.
You're getting into a relativism. There's no absolute.
There's no absolute, so nothing joins people together. Do no harm. How do you know what harm is? What's your definition thereof? So Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote this book called The Gulag Archipelago, which I'd recommend reading, just so you can see what the potential of America is if we give into a socialistic system. It's not good. And he said, I'm trying to remember the exact quote, but something like, it's the duty of the individual not to give in to the lie. The lie, and eventually in Russia, what happened is it was illegal to complain. Imagine you're starving to death and so are your kids, and you can't complain to anybody. Because if you do, you're complaining against the system. They already have a perfect system. They've arrived. They're absolute. You complain, you and your family go to the gulag. And that's slave labor camp, really, in the cold. And your kids will probably die. You'll probably watch them die. There's points where they'd like throw a potato in a room of 12 starving people. You're going to watch them die. That ain't cool. That's what happens when, well, truth gets sacrificed. That's what happens when you change your definition of harm. It's relativistic. For the people living in cities, well, and see the people in the gulag, they're not doing harm. One aims down, one aims away. Do no harm. Just stay away. Non-interactive. One is love God. It's proactive. It goes towards something. It's an aim. So you can pull this back to like the Garden of Eden. I don't think that Eve had the biggest, fallout there. To me, it was Adam. Eve's nature is to be embracing. Adam's nature is to say, defend the garden and to say no. So what did Adam do? He did nothing. And then he blamed her. It was like it was infinitely changed the world, you put it that way. He did nothing in action. So instead of loving, you're just staying over here, whatever my definition of is. This actually is the people that buy into this is the same people that buy into the planet worship, which is kind of weird because if I don't know that I'm causing toxic waste on the planet, well, then I guess I'm doing no harm. Because that's the relativistic perspective. Why choose to look that direction? Christ told a parable about this too. And you guys, you're all believers in here, so this is sort of easy, but I don't know, it's after lunch, so we're all kind of sleepy, maybe not. What parable do you think matches this? Who's your neighbor? So the Levites and the priests, they didn't do anything. They just walked on by. And that's doing no harm. I didn't hit him. You just keep walking, even though you see it, and you know you should do something. And that's the difference between a Christian and a theist. One will say, I pray for you. The other one says, I will pray for you, then actually does something about it. So if your story is do no harm, to the best of your definition of harm, and live as you will, you are willfully making yourself ignorant when you have the potential to learn, especially about your neighbor. It also detaches yourself from love. And if you see, because I have a guy at my work who says he's a Buddhist. I'm like, you are not a Buddhist. You have a girlfriend and a child, and you care for them. Sorry, man. Like you can't sell that one to me. You're obviously not living it out. And he has giant hoop rings with a Buddha in the middle. He's a very funny character. He's also like very skinny and has migraines. He's a very interesting guy to talk to.
Does he have a man bun?
He does not have a man bun. He has a nice crew cut. He's watched every anime, I think, in existence, so we can have conversations on that, because that's like modern stories. I don't know how often you guys ever go to Hot Topic? You know what Hot Topic is?
Store?
Yeah, it's a store. Yeah, it is a scary store. So when I was younger, and I guess that I'd still be a baby compared to some of you in here, but when I was like a teenager, so that's 25 years ago. Yeah, about 25 years ago. You could go into that store, and it's really, I only know this in retrospect because I looked at it now. You see what binds the teenagers. You can see it. What binds the kids? Well, there's bands all over the place. Are you getting ready to throw that? There's bands all over the place. So there's only a couple of bands. There's different factions in high school. For those of you that are roughly my age, you might remember the jocks. There might have been the punks. And they would all kind of gravitate around the bands. So the music would kind of define their culture, or their culture would define the music. It kind of worked both ways. It was a relationship there. So you go to Hot Topic, you'd see the shirts for this stuff like all over the place. Maybe some Harry Potter things, because Harry Potter, you have to throw the power of the witchcraft aside. There's still a hero's journey element in there. All right, there's still a Christ element in there. You would not find it interesting unless there was. Nobody would. That's the coolest part about all of the media. Try to pick out some of the Christ elements in there. So now they don't have music groups anymore in Hot Topic, because music is like infinite. You can go download whatever. People can make like high quality music that used to take them like weeks to make. You can make in like 20 minutes now. So technology's getting pretty good. Now there's anime. You guys know what anime is? Japanese animation. And there's only a couple of them up there for the shirts. So what's binding the kids? Story. Story is binding kids together. Story is amazing. People resonate with stories. So stories are very important, and especially the one you tell yourself. If you tell yourself you have a story, but origin, meaning, morality, destiny, and you can figure all those out, you can live a pretty good life, even as an atheist. I'm going nowhere. Well, that's a gap as far as I'm concerned, but at least you have an idea of where you're going. You have sort of a worldview kind of fit in there. All right, that makes sense to me.
What were the two anime things that they had in there?
Oh, they had a lot there.
I
So,
thought you said they just had like.
a few. Sorry, I said they have a few. It's like Naruto's a big one. My kids like watching that. That's just a funny show, to be honest. People throwing balls of energy at each other, and it's PG. It's not even PG-13. It's like PG, so no one bleeds ever. It's really fun. Dragon Ball Z was the older version of this, which is they spend 5 episodes charging up a Powerball to throw and then miss the guy, and you're just like, what did I watch? It's a drama show, right? It ties people into it, and it's binding. These, especially movies. You go see movies. Movies are binding. A movie like Avatar, Sound of Freedom. These things, you can talk about the story, right? They can resonate off your own story at the same time. So that's what's in Hot Topic. And you can live a life like that. I mean, that's livable. One of the detriments, though, and this is something that I'm glad I'm on the board with Jess there, is oftentimes the schools are what's telling the children the stories these days on what you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to aim at, how you're supposed to carry yourself, and where you come from. Your time plus matter plus chance. Sexuality is the highest peak. We're going to teach you that young. You get to choose where you go. So that's really, I guess, ambiguous. Giant cloud of chaos wherever you're going to go. Tell you what to root for. The American flag is even taken out of some of the, I don't even think they say the pledge in public school anymore, but that I'm not sure about. I'm just not in that venue anymore. Actually, since I had kids, because I started sending them to Christian school. So I'm going to read you something. I think I've read it at every one of my talks, because these are supposed to be, I guess, you can feel free to interrupt me if you need clarity, that kind of thing, but they're supposed to be interactive, and they are supposed to be in lecture form. Yes. Yeah.
So women knew nothing about evil. We're living evil. Or lack of
Yeah, but it's even worse than that. At least I think so. So, what's the opposite of love? Indifference. That comes so quick from you guys. Usually I have to yank it out of the people I talk to, like everybody. Usually it's hate, right? No, hate has passion in it. Even anger to a point appeals to justice. It appeals to something else. But hate has passion. An abusive parent will feed the child. A neglectful one will not. So it's indifference. So we get back to the Wiccan philosophy and the Hindu philosophy. They teach indifference and love. So which one is it? How do you have a relationship with life if you're taught not to interact with it? It's very weird. I am leaving open hope that somebody can maybe help me with this. I don't think they can. I really don't. So that's one part of the story. I'm going to read you Nietzsche's Parable of the Madman because, well, it's pretty poignant. It's the idea if you have no story, really, you're not attached to anything grandiose, and I think it's worth repeating. And well, here it goes. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I'm looking for God, I'm looking for God. As many of those who do not believe in God were standing together there, he excited considerable laughter. Have you lost him then, said one. Did he lose his way like a child, said another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or emigrated? Thus they shouted and laughed. The madman sprang into their midst and pierced them with his glances. Where has God gone? He cried. I shall tell you. We have killed him, you and I. We are his murderers. But how have we done this? How are we able to drink of the sea? Who gave us a sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What do we do when we chained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns. Are we not perpetually falling, backwards, sidewards, forwards, in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of an empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not more and more night coming on all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not yet smell anything yet of God's decomposition? God's to decompose. God is dead, and God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, the murderer of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was holiest and mightiest of all the world has possessed, has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods simply to be worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever shall be born after us for the sake of this deed, he shall be a part of a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and again regarded his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern to the ground, and it broke and went out. I have come too early, he said to them. My time has not yet come. The tremendous event is still on its way, still traveling. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars require time. Deeds require time even after they are done, before they can be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. It has been further related that on the same day the madman entered diverse churches, and there sang a requiem. Let out in quiet that he is said to have retorted each time, what are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?
Which of Nietzsche's works?
It's a separate thing. It's the parable of the madman. I think it's in one of his earlier letters before he started writing like Beyond Good and Evil. I'm not sure which one exactly.
Yeah, it's Beyond Good and Evil, Human Altruism.
Might have been the gay science,
Twilight,
but I'm not.
Twilight.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about. I just remember. I actually never looked up the source, but I'm pretty sure it's in one of his. It's roughly its own thing. It's not in one of his books. I didn't read it Beyond Good and Evil or the Genealogy of Morals. So that's what happens when you have no story. You separate yourself from all bounds. Anything is permissible. Everything is perspective. And he made two predictions. He made, and Carl Jung actually made this too. Carl Jung had visions of blood pouring over Europe before World War II. Nietzsche said that the 20th century would be the bloodiest century in human history, which it was. And then a universal madness would break out. I think we're feeling the madness right now because we're dissecting words like male, female. Not too long ago, Amy Coney Barrett, that's her name. So she was up there, I guess, being harassed by those that were going to help appoint her as judge, or she was just going to be, and she was answering questions. And I watched online the definition of the word preference, get the parentheses around the word offensive. So suddenly, because she did that, the word preference is now offensive because she said something about sexual preference. And they changed the word online right in front of my face. And I'm like, man. And so my wife, who's awesome, she bought me a hardcover dictionary. So that way, they can't change my definitions on me without me knowing about it. I was really blown away by that. So that's what happens when you have no story. You're kind of in a vacuum. So here's where I get to get to Joseph Campbell and C.S. Lewis, because those guys are just such interesting characters. I think C.S. Lewis read every single thing that was written in the 16th century, like everything, just so he felt he needed that to grasp, like, I think English history. I forget what's in the Oxford Library. Literary critic? Okay. He wrote a history of something. What was that? Yeah, he wrote the history of, I want to say English literature, but I'm fuzzy. I only read one autobiography, and good luck taking all that stuff in. Like, his life was pretty awesome. So he's a very well-read guy, and he was very much into myth, the concept of myth. And I'm going to read you some of the excerpts he wrote, not in story, but in letters to people. So I'll try to unpack them as well, because it's one thing to write a book for the masses. It's another thing to write a personal letter that you both have some understanding or at the same level or something like that. So Joseph Campbell, I'm going to start with him. I honestly forget where I heard of him. But my question's always been, where is God in the East? Where was Christ? How was he speaking to people in China at like 50 BC? Right? There had to have been something. If we believe in a God that's going to have love for everybody, there has to be something over there. And I just got done reading a book on Confucius thought, and his biggest thing is he saved a lot of the old Chinese poetry. So over there, you can also see the concept of duty and the reincarnation. They also have a thing called the yin yang symbol. You guys have seen that. And start talking about the Tao. That's the relationship of order and chaos. That takes a long time to get into, but I think there's some truth there. There's some, and they still honor their father and mother, and there's duty, and that's amazingly east of Eden. And when you get west of Eden, and this is just generalizations, there's always exceptions. It's called the Occidental mythology. And so east of Eden, it's all about sacrifice. You need to sacrifice to the appropriate thing, or the earth will have you. And so in India, just an offshoot, yeah, they only used to have, I started saying this, sorry I didn't finish my thought, but they only had like 2 or 3 religions over there until, you guys remember what happened with Constantine? So what did Constantine do? That's part of it. What else did he do? Yeah, that's what he did. He had a dream with a cross on his shield, and he was overwhelmed. And he's like, if I put this on my shield, we win. Christianity is the religion. And so he won. And so what happened is there a mass persecution of every other faith happened, and they all went east. And that's where we get all these millions of deities, because the Hindi faith, they're okay with contradictions. So they'll just, you know what, you're part of ours too. That's why you'll see different versions of pagan gods and stuff like that, and the Baals and Ishtar, even over in the Hindi culture. It's really neat how they all got mixed up over there. So that's just a one-off. I thought that was a really neat historical fact. So Joseph Campbell, he wrote about all this stuff. He wrote about every single religion possible, because, well, he was just a mythical historian, put it that way, history and mythology. And he found the common element. What is the common story told in every single story? There's a theme. There has to be a theme. Maybe there doesn't have to be a theme, but there is one. And he called it the hero's journey. And The Hero with 1,000 Faces is probably his best work on the whole concept of it. And he drew a map of it, and it's a brilliant map. It's like a circle, like this. And this top part, that's the known. And what happens is you go down into the unknown, and this is hell. And then you come back. Now, through the course of it, you might have a mentor. You might have someone that helps you. And when you go down here, you actually die. At least part of you does. And this is where we can, have Christ's words of, if something causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. Because sometimes the part of you that's going to burn off, if you're like 90% driftwood, well, you might actually perish if you're not willing to give up some of yourself to continue out of hell and come back. And the idea is you come down here through hell, you get tempered, part of you burns off, and you come back changed with a message for the rest of the world. Now, the thing I don't get about going back to Buddha when he opted out is his whole concept of you want to get yourself away from desire. But then he desired to come back and share with other people to get away from desire. So that to me, that was kind of a red flag. But you have this hero's journey that's everywhere in myth. And I can't find a better way where that's depicted except for the Christian story with Christ. What's heavier than death that you can come back from, like actual death? And there are other stories that kind of mirror this. And C.S. Lewis saw this too. He read about mythology as well, about Mithras and not Mithras, Ansu-El in the Mesopotamian area, like Horus in the Egyptian area, and how they echo similarities, but it's not the same thing. So I'm going to read you something by C.S. Lewis here, which is what his conclusion is. Well, a couple of them. This is a quotation from C.S. Lewis in a letter to Arthur Greaves from the Kilns on his conversion to Christianity. He says, "Now the story of Christ is simply a true myth, a myth working on us in the same way as the others, but with this tremendous difference, that it really happened. And one must be content to accept it in the same way, remembering that it is God's myth where the others are men's myths, like the pagan stories, are God expressing himself through the minds of the poets, using such images as he found there, while Christianity is God expressing himself through what we call real things. Therefore, it is true, not in the sense of being a description of God that no finite mind could take in, but in the sense of being the way in which God chooses to or can appear to our faculties. The doctrines we get out of the true myth are, of course, less true. They are the transitions into our concepts and ideas of that which God has already expressed in a language more adequate, namely, the actual incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection. Does this amount to belief in Christianity? At any rate, I am now certain, A, that this Christian story is to be approached in a sense as I approach other myths, and B, that it is the most important and full of meaning. I am also nearly certain that it really happened. So that was his conclusion after looking at all of the myths that were available to him and seeing Christianity. Now, I don't want this to go over an hour because I'm losing some of you, and that's okay. I get it. Sleepy lunchtime, and this is your free time, and I'm really very honored you decided to spend it with me. I really am. But I wanted to kind of throw out there why I think Christianity is the ideal, specifically when looking at God, Mary, and Christ. I can try to overlay this with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit concept as a triune God, but I haven't quite got that together. But I can try to express to you why Christianity is the best. Well, there's no comparison, really. And you have to do this in the negative. And you can often see this in the Bible. God tells you to do something. Well, God tells people to do something in the Bible. They don't do it. Calamity happens. Well, that's why you do it. I mean, that makes sense, right? So you have God the Father. And what do fathers do? They guide, and they give instruction, and they're there, and they initiate. One of the things Joseph Campbell said, he was interviewed in the 80s about what do you think is causing all the gangs in Detroit was a big issue at that time. What do you think that causes all the gangs in Detroit? And he said, lack of ritual. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, judges wear cloaks, right? We're supposed to be secular. Why do they still wear the cloak? It's a ritual. It's supposed to demonstrate that they have authority, right? Visually demonstrate that. So, and I asked my friend who's from Ghana, Africa, Gideon, I'm like, they have rituals in your country, right? Yes. And they're painful, right? Yes. And they're only for men, right? Yes. Like, he's a very, very simple guy. And that's how they are. And you don't have that now, especially in America. There's no ritual you go through to, okay, now you have what it takes. That's what a father is supposed to do. So you kind of say, okay, you're a man now. You have what it takes. Go be a man, do man things. So what happens when the father's not there and doesn't guide? Well, you have gangs shooting each other. They're looking for something painful that's real and a way to be initiated into the most real thing possible, which I think is just protecting life. Be fruitful, multiply, right? Those things are so etched into us, we forget there's kids at the other end sometimes, right? The multiply part. It's a strong urge built into our DNA. And you have Mary, and the more I examine Mary, the more I can understand why Catholics would deify her. But at the same time, I don't think that's proper. But as far as Carl Jung called them the archetype. So it's like the highest, what you aim at, what you want to be like. Christ was obviously this. You want to try to be like Christ. So for Mary, what happens with Mary? She's given a child. There's no, at the moment, tangible father figure. So what is that? That's every woman that's ever been raped and says yes to life. Well, that's a good thing. Those are heroes as far as I'm concerned. You say yes to life anyway. That's pretty awesome. She also submits to the Father's guidance. She says, okay, I should say yes to life. Like, here's how things will be through the angel. And later on, Simeon says, he will pierce your heart. And what's that statue, the Pieta, right? When Mary's holding Christ in her arms. So, yeah. So, you're going to watch him grow up, and you're going to watch him die. And, geez, what parent wants to know that's what's going to happen? And she says yes anyway. So what happens when you don't? Also, she has to let him go. She has to let him do it. She can't protect him. So we look at the negative of that. Well, first off, she says no to life. Life stops. That's just how it happens. what is it, like ratio of, I think the average American is having 1.6 kids right now. That's not propagating the species. We're going down in population if you want to keep that up. Marriage is also going way down, but that's kind of off topic. There's a temptation, and those of you that read Where the Light Fell, of holding on to your children. Because as a mother, in a sense, as a parent, you have to fail. Because you have to get them to the point where they don't need you anymore. So you have to lose, you're kind of setting yourself as a parental, at least, not in the entire definition, you're always going to be their parents. But as far as you taking care of them all the time, giving them all their decisions, telling them what to do, you have to let them go, or they will not mature. I think it's the Oedipus complex, when the mother will say to the son something like, if you're too tired, you don't have to go to school. Like, man, what a way to set somebody up for well, again, that's the Buddha, right? We're not going to subject himself to hard things. Even though you're tired, go to school anyway, because that's what you're supposed to do. That sounds right. And then we have the son. So that's how you can see in the negative. And the son, what does the son have to do? The son has to embrace his destiny, listen to the father, allow himself to be let go of the mother, and then he has to give his life up to something heavy. Find something around yourself. You got to pick it up and carry it. And it might just kill you. Actually, it will. Give your life, your actual life, to something that you can see immediately around you, not in the abstract. That's one of the, I would say, detriments of the protesting type of concept, because you're standing up there and protesting, but you're not doing anything. It's almost like false, but moral points. You're trying to get points, like, I'm a moral person, I'm protesting. You're not really doing anything. You're just destroying things. If you want to do something, you go do something. Be proactive. Love God and do as you may. So if the son doesn't give his life up for something heavy, what happens? You stay in your mom's basement and play video games all day. You don't give up your life. You stay Peter Pan. You guys, anybody not see Peter Pan, the Disney version? You can use the negative. So what happens when Peter Pan enters? Like, he's not attached to his shadow, and he tries to attach it with soap, like the opposite of what you need. And the shadow is his dark side, and you need to embrace the shadow. Carl Jung has a nice long philosophy on embracing the shadow. So the general myth of mankind, all of it's right there, I think is very much expressed in the besides Christ himself, is in the parable story of Cain and Abel. And this is when they offer their sacrifices, and Cain's not too happy about that his fruits were not accepted like his brother's offering was. And God says to him, anybody remember what God says to him? What does God say to Cain? Something like that, yeah. That's it. Behold, sin crouches at the door and desires to have you. And some of the commentaries I read on that, it's like in a sexual nature. It wants to have its way with you, but you must master it. And it can. What's a demon? Well, alcoholism sure is. It has control of you. It makes you do something you don't want to do. How do you beat it? You have to master it. You have to control it. You have to contend with it. So the myth of mankind, as far as I can tell, is not do no harm, not run away. It's you face the darkness and you master it. And I can't see any story better than Christ. Nothing else prepares you for the terrors of the world, for our fallen world, and lets you act proactively for a better cause. I think that's all I have. I'm going to read you one more thing from C.S. Lewis, and I'll be done. This is following is an excerpt from an essay by Lewis, first published in 1944, titled "Myth Became Fact." What flows into you from the myth is not true myth, but reality. Truth is always about something, but reality that about which truth is. Truth is always about something, but reality is that which truth is. And therefore, every myth becomes the father of innumerable truths on an abstract level. Myth is the mountain which all the different streams arise, which become truths down here in the valley. An ad hoc valley abstractionist in the valley of separations. Or if you prefer, Myth is the isthmus, which connects the peninsular world of thought with that vast continent we really belong to. It is not, like truth, abstract, nor is it, like direct experience, bound to the particular. A man who disbelieves the Christian story as fact, but continually fed on it as myth, would, perhaps, be more spiritually alive than one who assented and did not think much about it. So that's being a Christian as opposed to just going to church every Sunday, following Christ. The modernist need not be called a fool or hypocrite because he obstinately retains, even in the midst of his intellectual atheism, the language, rites, sacraments, and story of the Christians. The poor man may be clinging, with a wisdom he himself by no means understands, to that which is his life. So he's making the case there that even the atheist who's interested in these stories about sacrifice and meaning and purpose, even the fictional ones, is still grabbing onto the concept that represents the true story, which is Christ. So which story are we telling ourselves? You know, there's this kid. Oh, what's?
Reality is uh, consummation.
Yeah.
That's so fallacious. Because the reality that is presupposed on so much more. We made it kind of out of all the error and continue to do
Yeah.
man's new emphasis back to that future was
Oh man, which one?
so why I mean
Oh, the Madman parable? Yeah, read this for like a year. It's heavy. It's heavy. It gets me every time. Oh, he's arrogant. No. So, I'm sorry. Let me pull back. Then he is not saying that he killed. He proclaimed it. He didn't say he did it. He said we kind of threw him away, and here's what's going to happen.
you know the sounds that he's more with the fact that he was red cross and he was eliminated.
Yeah.
But he spoke truth in that. But the fallacy is that no,
No, we can't.
you can believe whatever you want to believe. It's going to help.
And that's what C.S. Lewis was saying at the end there. He's like, regardless, you still think what is good, what is evil, because it resonates with the Christian story and with what God and Christ is. So that's, even if you're an atheist, it doesn't matter. Like those things, you can bounce them off nature and reality, and Christ.
Okay, where does that
You should join me at work. I do this sometimes. It is absolutely crazy. Oh yeah. Well, the first part, they're enchanted by the madman. They're like, ha ha ha, whatever. Then he says all that stuff. They're like, oh my gosh. They're so leveled. And that was his leveling against the whole Enlightenment period. Like he was just, because it's not like he stopped with everybody but himself. He even destroyed his own philosophy, and he just went mad himself toward the end of his life. Yeah.
because they don't even have vocabulary. I mean, that's not protecting them. No, I just read like
It's surface level.
100 words of you.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing.
So I like giving, to your point, I like giving people something to think about. So I have to take that and make that a conversation and make it simple. Not to devalue the intelligence of my fellow man, but I literally want them to understand it. So if I try to express that at my level, I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal. I've studied, they have not. So I have to relate that to them somehow, right? I think that makes sense. So I'm going to tell you one more story, and then it's going to be sort of an appeal. Yeah, I'll do that. So there's this kid that was in public school, and he raised his hand to be called on, and he never got called on, like ever, because they sat him behind a pole. So this kid You know, what story do you tell them? Sorry, your time plus matter plus space. Oh, that's just your karma kicking in, which is the argument they make in the Hindi area, by the way. Don't help the untouchables. They are living out their karmic life. It's actually bad for you if you do. So this kid now goes to Keystone Christian Academy, which is kind of cool. And he was given value and love. You know, my kids go to the school, so I'm really kind of into it. I'm just going to make a suggestion because it's something you can do and something I'm probably going to do this year if I can. There's this program called EITC, and basically what it is you, whatever your state taxes are, you can do this for an individual and a business. You can take your state taxes and put them toward a private school. And then at the end, you have to pay it forward though. At the end of the year, you get 80% credit back. 90% credit back of what you paid. And there's no gimmick to it. That's exactly what it is. So Jess spoke about trying to get the churches to buy into something like that. Like they won't even do that. So that's kind of like, if you want to help out a little bit to make a difference, at least in the York area, this area is not the most successful, you put it that way. But we see lives change there, which is just so cool. It's a great ministry. And who's telling your kids stories in the public school? And what story are they telling them? In a Christian school, that's what they're getting and that's what they need to get. Now, it's kind of unfortunate, I think, that both mom and dad, most of the time, have to work. So then the kids go where? Daycare, public school. So what story are they being told? Maybe the one on social media. So if you guys want more information on EITC, because I think that is a really good program, we just talked with Jess back there. She'll be happy to help you out with it, because it is just that easy. Well, maybe there's a couple of steps in there, but that's what it is. There's really no caveat to it. It's a Pennsylvania. Yeah, that's the. No, it's just Pennsylvania, from what I understand. So if you're outside Pennsylvania, sorry, but if you're in Pennsylvania, it's an amazing thing, and they got lots of money so it's like a third party, right? So that way the government's not in control of this. It's like you give it to them, and then they give it to the school, something like that. Yeah, you absolutely can. So I don't like.
So you're paying anyway.
Yeah.
You can say no. I want to go here.
You are. Yep. Governor Wolf hates this thing.
How long has that been going on? Boy, they keep that quiet.
Yeah, no kidding.
Scholarship organization. They walk you through the whole process. Apply for the funding.
Here, you guys can talk about it like after, just so I can let the group go, if that's okay. But yeah, it's worthy of doing. It's authentic. There's no gimmick behind it.
I just said EITC Pennsylvania, following Google, and it's just a long list of all kinds of FAQs and articles.
Oh yeah,
by the state,
the internet can walk you through it.
I'm just scrolling down all the stuff like that. Educational income tax, educational improvement tax credit program. Yeah, it's definitely out there. I never heard of it.
Yeah, so this is, we're all believers here, and that's a great way to take the money you're paying anyway, and then you kind of get most of it back, and it gets designated to a school. And that is absolutely awesome. I'm so concerned about the stories we tell our kids. Yeah, this is something I would say you need to do if you can.
There are programs you can find online again that are, so it is not just Christian schools.
Yeah, it's really cool. So yeah, part of this is kind of, I guess, my cross that I try to carry is, you see things happen around you, because it's hard. You can say what's happening over there in Ukraine. Sure, if you're part of Ukraine, maybe do something about it. But it's very tough for me to be attached to that when I have the immediate world around me. We have to not forget about our individual communities. So there was this one time where a kid was almost abducted, in a local bus stop. My friend's daughter was there, and he ran. He's a fast runner, luckily, and they couldn't get a police car out there for the entire day to even check on what was going on. So you can get mad at that real quick. What's going on with the police department? Or I teach martial arts. Maybe I'll have a youth self-defense seminar, and so I did that. And people really liked it. I'm like, so I was asking kids, how do you shake a hand? And these kids are like 13. They don't know how. You're walking down the side of the road. Which side do you stand on? If you're the guy, where do you, which hand do you hold? The basic, I think, were basic etiquette things. Kids have no idea. Or I'll ask you guys. You can probably get this pretty quick. I'll ask them. They all sit down. I'm like, okay, how many exits are in the room? Don't look.
What?
Exits. 5. 1. Sorry, 6. I forgot those were. I thought there were one door. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When you run, where do you run? You run away? No, you run to safety. There's 2 different answers, right? If this is an alleyway, right, and I'm in an alleyway, bad guy's right here, am I going to run further into the alley? Maybe I have to face the darkness to get to safety, right? Because what's worse, being in an alley you can't get out of, or having the potential to leave. So those kind of things. I thought, what can I do? So that was kind of thing. So this is the same type of thing. I like having the kids being taught the proper story about their given dignity by Christ, and their lives are important. So I'll pray for us, and we'll be on our way. Thank you, Lord Heavenly Father, for giving us this time together. Thank you that you've honored me with your sons and daughters to be here with me and to discuss these heavy things. Be with us as we go about our day on the retreat, and be with our spirits and keep us refreshed as we climb down the mountain toward our regular lives. In your name we pray. Amen. So, see Jess.